What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. In this video, I'm going to share the 3 rules of wintertime jerkbait fishing. Let's get into it. Rule number 1 of wintertime jerkbait fishing is keep your distance. When anglers think of fishing a jerkbait in the wintertime, the main thing I think that pops to mind is usually fishing it super slow on long pauses, letting a bait suspend in the middle of the water column. And that is basically the general technique when fishing a jerkbait. You basically want a bait that is neutrally buoyant in the water, so it suspends and stays at the same level. You want to fish it slow and keep it in front of those fish's face as long as possible. But there's one statement in there that I hear a lot, which is keep it in front of the fish's face, which is actually a pretty big misconception and something that I think is going to impact your success negatively with jerkbaits in the wintertime. What I've found over the years with jerkbaits, both from my experience when I was younger as well as recent experience using forward-facing sonar technology to observe bass behavior with jerkbaits, is that you want to try to keep the jerkbait as far away from the fish as possible while working it slow to get the most bites. What I mean by this is that you don't want that jerkbait to get within, let's say, a foot or 2 of the fish's face. The closer the jerkbait gets to a fish's face, the less bites you're going to get. This might seem counterintuitive because you think in the wintertime the fish are lethargic, water temperatures are cold, low 40s, high 30s, and so the closer you can get that bait to the fish's face, the better your chances of getting him to bite. But in reality, it's actually the opposite. The closer that bait is to the fish's face, the better look they're going to get at that bait, and the less likely they are to actually hit the bait. They may tap at it, swipe at it, maybe hit the back hook and you accidentally, get them as they kind of nose up to it, but they're not going to inhale that bait and eat it if it's right there in front of their face. And again, I've observed this with forward-facing sonar technology recently where I can actually see the fish reacting to my bait. So this is not just a guess here, I actually can see it happening live in the water. Now, there's a lot of nuance to this concept, so I'm going to try to break it down as simple as I can, but let's just take jerkbait in hand here. This is the Megabass Vision 110 Plus 2. It dives anywhere from 8 to 12 feet deep depending on my casting distance, line, things like that. Let's just say it reels down to 10 feet deep though at its maximum depth. So if I have, let's say, relatively clear water, 4 foot of water visibility, a bass might be able to see this jerkbait from 10 feet away. At 10 feet, the bass can see the bait, but it may not be that interested to actually eat the bait because it's so far away from the fish. It's gonna have to work so hard to go get that bait, and you are basically making that fish work more than it's willing to come up and eat that bait. So if that fish is, let's say, in 20 feet of water and that bait's in 10 foot of water, you're not going to get that fish to get interested enough to come eat it. It may swim halfway up to get to that jerkbait, then kind of swim away, you work the bait by it, you don't get a bite. On the flip side though, if that fish is in 11 feet of water and that bait works right over the top of its head, it gets such a good look at that bait in 4 foot of water that the fish realizes there's something wrong with it. It has these little hooks that are hanging off, it's not perfectly natural, and it's just going to kind of look at that bait, look at it, and swim away. And if you've ever fished with forward-facing sonar and a jerkbait, you probably are very well accustomed to fish looking at your bait and then swimming away. So there's going to be a magic zone between being 10 feet away from that fish and a foot away from that fish. And that is going to depend on the day, time of day, sky conditions, how windy it is, the actual water temperature you're fishing in. But usually somewhere between that 10 foot and a foot away from that fish is the magic distance that you need to keep that bait to get that fish curious enough to actually go eat the bait, but also have not a good enough look at it to actually want to commit to it and not just stare at it. And you can't really determine that fully on a day-to-day basis or an hour-by-hour basis with some rule of thumb. Maybe if we did enough experiments over the years, we might be able to figure it out, or I might be able to figure it out, but I haven't figured that out yet. So what I've basically done over the years is experiment with different jerkbaits and different depths of jerkbaits, as well as different depths of fish that I'm actually targeting, and I try to find that perfect balance myself through trial and error. Before forward-facing sonar, what I would basically do is pick a jerkbait that dives like this to 10 feet deep. I would also have a jerkbait that maybe dives 7 feet deep, so it dives a little bit shallower. Then I'll have a jerkbait that dives, let's say, 4 to 5 feet deep. And then I might have another jerkbait that dives 2 to 3 feet deep. And then I'll try to locate fish using my electronics or just my best instinct, whether that is finding a rocky ledge that sticks out that's in 10 feet of water. I know those fish are probably close to that ledge, so they're in 10 feet. So if that rocky ledge is in 10 foot, I work a bait that gets down, let's say 10 feet, don't get bit. Work a bait that goes 8 feet, don't get bit. Then work a bait that goes 5 feet, oh, I start getting bit. So now I know that when those fish are on a 10-foot ledge, I need to throw a 5-foot diving jerkbait, and now I'm getting my bites. But then if I go to a different piece of cover, let's say it's in 15 feet of water and I think there are fish there, maybe I need to throw that 10-foot diving bait on that 15-foot ledge to get those fish to bite, because my 5-foot diving jerkbait isn't getting it done. You had to do a lot of this trial and error, and it meant that you didn't get that many bites on the jerkbait because you also have to work that bait relatively slow. And I would only get maybe 4, 5, 6 bites on the jerkbait all day in the winter, but a lot of them were really, really big. And this is all pre-forward facing sonar. Post-forward facing sonar, it's a lot easier because you can do a little bit less trial and error. You don't have to make as many casts, and you can just see where the fish are in the water column, see how deep your bait is diving, and you can even change your retrieve to maybe make this 10-foot diving jerkbait only dive 7 foot on one cast, then 5 foot on the next cast. And you don't have to have as many rods out or experiment with as many different retrieves, because you can actually see how that fish is reacting to your bait. But either way, having a variety of baits and different things is going to allow you to change how you're presenting that bait to the fish, kind of changing the distance that bait is away from those fish, and figure out what the optimal distance away is based on the conditions you're in. Now, this is very technical. Hopefully everyone's following along to this without a bunch of graphics and demonstrations, but something that is super important with jerkbait fishing. But to add to the complexity of this explanation, you also have to worry about the color of your bait. So the brighter the color or more matte finish your jerkbait is, the easier it is for the fish to see the bait. And sometimes when you're fishing a jerkbait in pretty dirty water, let's say 1 foot to 2 foot of visibility, you need to go to a more matte white bait or something that's brighter in the water column and get that bait closer to those fish to be able to get them to bite. So if those fish are in 6 foot of water, you may need to get that bait within 2 feet of them with a bright white color to get them to bite. But sometimes those fish don't want that bright white color 2 feet away from them. They want it 3 or 4 feet away from them. Or they want maybe a more chrome or like a translucent or different colors at different depths. So maybe a chrome bait, they want it 4 feet away. A more translucent bait, they want it 2 feet away from their head. And you have to experiment with that as well. So not only the diving depth, but the color of your jerkbait, because it is a very visual bite, the jerkbait bite. And you don't need to get super bothered by like all of the different crazy colors that are on the market. There's so many colors that are out there. My main thing is I like some type of matte white side finish, or at least something that is more of like a flat white color. It can be semi-translucent like this Lucky Craft pointer. And then you want something that's a little bit more translucent on the sides, maybe like these couple of jerkbaits here. And then some type of chrome finish is going to usually be pretty effective as well. It doesn't need to be full chrome, but like a chrome black back. Gold chrome with a black back can be really effective. But having just a few colors like that and experimenting with the different depths and things like that. When I would fish jerkbaits pre-forward facing sonar, I would sometimes have like 7 jerkbait rods out with all these different colored jerkbaits, all these different things. And I finally find one on that day based on the sun and conditions, how cloudy it was, water temps, wind, all that stuff. They got me the most bites on that day. Less complicated now with forward facing sonar, but still takes some thought to figure out which baits to throw. So that's rule number 1, keep your distance with winter jerkbaits. Rule number 2 of winter jerkbait fishing is cadence is everything and nothing. What do I mean by that? Well, this is another kind of complex explanation because jerkbait fishing is a very advanced bass fishing technique. It's not something that's super easy to figure out. I've spent literally thousands of hours jerkbait fishing in the winter. I love it. It's something I've been doing since I was like 13 years old, and I have just been doing it non-stop for years, trying to figure out how to be really good at it. And I would spend my entire winter breaks when I was a kid out of school. I would spend 2 full weeks on the lake as much as possible. I would just get dumped in the water by my dad in the boat. Wouldn't even have gas, in the boat. I would just go around on my trolling motor, just throwing the jerkbait, and that was all we would do. Dump me in, go on my trolling motor, and I would fish as long as I could until the batteries died. And what I learned from all of that is that I experimented with a pile of retrieves, working the bait fast, slow, pausing it for a long time, not pausing it for a long time, giving it short, small twitches, bigger twitches. And I've seen so many different explanations on the internet of the best way to work a jerkbait. And the only thing that I have really come to realize is that there's no perfect cadence for a jerkbait, with one exception. And that's why I say the retrieve or the cadence is everything and nothing. So whenever the water temperatures are above, I would say like 43 degrees in the wintertime, 43 and above, I don't think that the cadence matters nearly as much as the first rule, which is getting that bait the specific distance you need away from those fish. I do think that you can overwork your jerkbait in the winter, so you don't want to be giving your jerkbait massive big twitches, making it cut side to side like crazy. But if you bring that bait past that fish at the right level for the day, at like maybe a twitch, twitch, pause for a few seconds, twitch, twitch, pause, versus maybe 1, 2, 3 small twitches and pause, 1, 2, 3, all these different cadences you could do, or 1 twitch, pause, 1 twitch, pause. Sometimes even just slowly reeling that bait at that depth, pause, slowly reeling it, pause. There's a bunch of different retrieves you can do, but none of that really matters as long as you're within that range of the fish that we talked about earlier. Those fish are going to either react to that bait or they're not. There are days when they may get behind it on forward facing and you can kind of trick them into biting, but without forward facing, it's really hard to know. So I didn't really find that the cadence made that big of a difference day to day when water temperatures were above 43, maybe 44 degrees. But below 43 or 44 degrees, the cadence was everything. And what I mean by that is I would let my bait sit for an extremely long time when water temperatures were 33 degrees to 43 degrees. When I say an extremely long time, I'm talking about an 8 to 30-second pause on my jerkbait. 8 seconds is still long if you actually wait 8 seconds for your jerkbait to sit there. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, so on. That's a long pause. 30 seconds, you literally could like eat a sandwich while doing one retrieve on your jerkbait. But when you're in an area where you feel very confident there are fish, that super slow retrieve, when it's really cold outside, will get you way more bites than like really any other retrieve, a fast retrieve. And the key to this is you want to have a bait that properly suspends. You don't want your bait to be sinking during that time or floating during that time. You need it to be perfectly neutrally buoyant and just sitting in the water. And this is really tricky at times because depending on the water temperature, depending on the part of the lake you're on, it sometimes even just depends on how your jerkbait is maybe working on any given day or a specific brand of jerkbait. It's going to change how this bait suspends in the water. And so what I'll do is I'll check my jerkbait every 15 to 20 minutes near the side of the boat to make sure that it's perfectly suspending. And if it's not perfectly suspending, I'm going to adjust the hooks and the split ring and maybe lead wire combination on this jerkbait. The way I normally weight my jerkbaits that is kind of the easiest, at least for me, is to either change out the hooks to a bigger or smaller hook, or to add a second split ring to the front hook hanger of that jerkbait. I don't like wrapping lead wire around just because it can come off and it's just kind of annoying to deal with. So I just put an extra split ring on the front. It causes that bait to either sink or rise slow or fast. You may need to go to like lead wire for like small, tiny adjustments if it's just barely rising or barely sinking. If it's like rising at an inch every 3 seconds, it's not that big of a deal. Like it's not gonna make that big of a difference, but you don't want it rising a foot every 5 seconds when you're working that super slow retrieve, because after 30 seconds, that bait's going to rise up 6 feet. So that's definitely not what you want. You want it to stay in the strike zone for a long time. So that is also kind of a tricky part of this, is as water temperatures rise or fall, even in a given day, that will change the buoyancy of these jerkbaits. You have to be really on top of it, which again makes jerkbait fishing a pretty challenging technique. And honestly, so many guys are now with forward-facing sonar just going to the jig head minnow, because it is a little bit easier to, the fish commit, it seems like a little bit better to a jig head minnow than a jerkbait at times. And it's not as complicated. There are some nuances to the jig head minnow, but jerk baits are just, you know, they're very nuanced baits. There's a bunch of hooks hanging off of them, so it's not the most natural looking bait, though it can be pretty natural and pretty good looking to the fish. And it is unique in the sense that it can suspend in the middle of the water column, but with that comes so many different nuances with retrieve and all those things. So I wouldn't get too caught up in your retrieve. Cadence, whether you twitch it fast or slow, I think a lot of it just comes down to confidence that you have. But I will say that the length of your pause is really key as that water temperature gets below 43 degrees. Above 43 degrees, let's say 43 to 50 degrees, a 1 to 3 second pause is going to be fine most days. You don't need to really pause it for that long. Just don't like overwork the bait. You don't want to twitch your rod super aggressive. Just give it small little twitches. Don't overwork the bait. Just little twitches to get that bait to just kind of move a little bit, or even just small reels with the reel handle. That's enough to get that bait to just dart a little bit side to side or roll side to side, and that's all you really need out of your jerkbait. So that's rule number 2. Rule number 3 of winter jerkbait fishing is trust the process. Jerkbait fishing is not an easy technique. I would consider it one of the hardest techniques in bass fishing for a new angler to become proficient at. You can go out and catch a few fish here and there on a jerkbait, but to be a consistently good jerkbait angler, it takes patience, it takes a lot of attention to equipment and detail, and I could talk about a million other things about jerkbaits in this video, but just getting out there and keeping up your confidence, keeping up your patience with a jerkbait is going to be critical, especially without forward-facing sonar. If you have forward-facing sonar, it's going to be easier to understand what the fish are doing and how to work your jerkbait and stuff like that. But even then, there are days when you can go out with a jerkbait with forward-facing sonar, throw at 40 fish, and maybe get 1 to commit. And that's because you're not paying attention to the distance that bait is away from the bait. The colors, your retrieve, your cadence, all those things are causing you to maybe not present the bait in the right way. So even seeing the fish on the screen, it may not be that easy to get him to bite. And if you're not seeing them on the screen, it's even harder. But I will say it is 100% worth it. I have some videos on my YouTube channel from way back in like 2018, 2017, where I was on Lake Dardanelle and all these other lakes in the central Arkansas area throwing a jerkbait, catching 5, 6, 7, 8 pounders on jerkbaits. And I just look back at those days, pre-forward facing sonar, just throwing the jerkbaits I have laid on the table here and absolutely smashing them. I caught my personal best bass on a jerkbait. That is a 10 pounder here in Arkansas, which is a big fish for Arkansas, especially because I caught it on a small public lake that gets a ton of fishing pressure that is not known for big fish. It's not like some massive fish lake. It's just a small lake that gets a ton of fishing pressure, and I caught it on this Smithwick Perfect 10 Rogue. This is a sweet little jerkbait, and it caught my biggest fish ever, 10 pounders. So I have a lot of fond memories of throwing jerkbaits over the years. One thing I will say is you want to invest in a pretty good jerkbait rod if you're going to throw a jerkbait, so when you do hook those fish, you're not going to lose them. This is the Denali Lithium Pro 7-foot medium power moderate action crankbait rod. It's my go-to jerkbait rod. It's also I throw all my flat side crankbaits and winter crankbaits on as well. But this rod is a little bit longer than your standard jerkbait rod, but I like that because it allows me to cast the bait a little bit further when I'm fishing offshore. I've tried shorter jerkbait rods from anywhere from like a 6'6", 6'8", 6'10". I just don't really like them. I'm also taller though, over 6 feet tall. So I don't know if maybe, if you're not as tall, maybe a 6'8", 6'10" jerkbait rod will work. I like throwing the 7 foot. And the main thing is that having a moderate action allows that tip to have quite a bit of bend to it. So when those fish eat that bait, you're not going to pull the treble hooks out of those fish's mouth. And then as far as my line goes, I usually throw either 10-pound fluorocarbon or 10-pound monofilament line with my jerkbaits. The fluorocarbon line is my preference when I'm fishing in water temperatures above 40-ish degrees, 41, 42 degrees, I'll throw fluorocarbon. But when the water temperatures drop below 40 degrees, I will go to monofilament, even though the line has a tendency to float more, just because it has less of a chance to break. Fluorocarbon line has a tendency to break sometimes when you get ice building up in your reel or on your guides and things like that. So I throw monofilament just because it can be a little bit sketchy in that really cold water, but fluorocarbon has sinking properties and will allow that bait to get down a little bit deeper, though It's not that big of a difference, but I just like having the line more in the water than on top of the water when working a jerkbait, because I feel like I can get a little bit better action out of the bait. So fluorocarbon if possible, monofilament also works. And for my reel, I just have like an Abu Garcia. This is a 7-to-1 gear ratio, Black Max or Max X, I don't know, some reel I picked up 5-6 years ago at Walmart. It's a 7-to-1. I'll throw a 7-to-1, a 6-to-1. I don't really care about the gear ratio so much on a jerkbait because I'm working the bait with my rod more than my reel most of the time, so that doesn't matter too much. But definitely picking up a good jerkbait rod is important because you're working hard to get these fish in the boat, and picking up a variety of jerkbaits. I'll just kind of list the ones I have here on the table. These are the jerkbaits I throw. First up, Megabass Vision 110 plus 2. Great jerkbait when you're fishing in deeper water, clearer water, and you can also vary the depth of this bait really well and forward facing to fish it as shallow as 3 feet and as deep as 10 feet based on the length of your cast and things like that. So good little jerkbait there. Another good one that's a little bit more of like a budget version of that same bait is this Spro Mixed Stick plus 1. Dives just a little bit shallower than that Vision 110 plus 2, but it's half the price, so decent bait right there. Then you have your Megabass just regular Vision 110. This is a great jerkbait when you're fishing in clear water and you want a bait that works in anywhere from 4 to 6 foot of water. When I'm fishing in dirtier water, when I have like, let's say 6 inches of visibility all the way up to 2.5 foot of visibility, that's when I'll go to the Lucky Craft Pointer 100. This has caught more big winter bass for me than any other jerkbait in my box by far. There's something special about dirtier water in the winter. Not dirty, it's like, I mean, I catch them in dirty water, don't get me wrong, like 6 inches of visibility, but like that 1.5 to 2.5 foot of water visibility, if you can find fish that are in that zone with this jerkbait, you can catch good numbers, but also some really big ones, especially on like river system type lakes or shallower, muddier lakes. And that Pointer 100 is just an awesome little jerkbait in that chartreuse shad color. And then last but not least, we have the Perfect 10 Rogue. When there's bigger bait fish or the fish are a little bit more aggressive, this is the bait that caught my personal best bass. Have a soft spot for this exact color and everything, but great little jerkbait right there. So those are my jerkbaits, setup, all that stuff. Hopefully this video wasn't too complex and made a little bit of sense, but I could talk about jerkbait fishing all day and never cover everything that I've learned over the years, but this is definitely a good starting point, I think, for any anglers who are wanting to get serious about their jerkbait fishing this winter. So thanks for checking out this video, guys. If you like the content, subscribe down below for more videos just like this coming every single week. See you guys in the next video.